Please welcome Susan Greene, the ex-director, retired director of the Philharmonic.
Thank you. It's great to be here, and it's great to see all of you. It is a somber occasion, and I'm delighted to have this chance to share my experience of that day with you. 3 more days. 3 more days, and it was finally going to be here. An incredible day that for 80 or 90 of us was probably going to be the highlight, the glory point of our professional careers. We had been waiting so long. 3 long years of waiting for the day to finally arrive. When I took over as executive director of the Colorado Springs Symphony, as it was called then, I have to tell you, I found myself confronted with a pretty demoralized group of musicians. They felt undervalued and unappreciated, and we didn't really have a music director at that point that made them feel good about themselves. And so they needed something I believed that they needed something to boost their morale. And so very soon after I took over, I thought, what a great morale booster it would be to have one of the greatest musical artists in the planet perform on the stage with us. And so I picked up the phone and I called an agent in New York, and it was the agent for Yo-Yo Ma.
Oh my goodness.
Arguably the greatest cellist alive today, and then as well. So it was actually, to take Warren's note of humor, it was actually kind of a funny conversation, because it kind of went like, you said your name was what? And you are with what orchestra? And I told her, and she said, and you want to bring who? And I said, Yo-Yo Ma, and she said, do you have any idea how costly that is? And I said, yeah, I was aware of it. It was a big fee, but I had a belief in our community. I had a belief in Colorado Springs that people would rally and would be willing to pay a higher ticket price at one time to have an event like this and to experience someone like this. And she said, well, you know, you can't have a date. It'll be 2 years at least, because he's booked for the next 2 years. And I said, well, I expected that. And she said, well, you won't be able to have them on a weekend, because those dates are all reserved for major orchestras. So you'll have to take a week now. And I said, well, that was okay too. And she said, okay, well, I'll let you know. And so there we were. I really didn't say much to anybody, because I wasn't really sure it was ever going to happen. And we kind of all slogged through the next 2 years. You know, we gave great concerts. It was good, but that sense of passion in the music needed to be reunited. It came in part when we got our new music director, Larry Smith, and lo and behold, 2 years later, my phone rang. And it was this agent from New York. And she said, I just might have a date for you. And I said, you're kidding. And she said, no. And I said, that's fabulous. When? And she said, well, you understand, it won't be until the beginning of next season, but I can give you a date. And we're going to tie it in with a performance he's going to do with the Colorado Symphony in Denver. So I haven't called Denver yet, so you can either have the day before or the day after. And Denver will go first. And I very cockily said, oh, I want to be first. And she said, great. Okay, we will get you a contract, Yo-Yo Ma, September 11, 2001. I said, wonderful. Now, you have to know that to have a professional orchestra, and these are all professional musicians, in a community this size is hard work, and it's hard work 24/7 because there's no cushion, there's nothing to fall back on. You start from zero every year, and you gotta make it through the year, and it's a big deal. So knowing that this was in the offing really, really made all of us feel much, much better. In fact, when I told my staff that this was actually going to happen, within a week there were calendars and signs all over our office how many days until September 11th, 2001. And they made this big calendar where we would X off the days as each day went by. And that night when I went to rehearsal and I told the musicians, it was really a surreal experience. I absolutely believe I felt, and they're playing that night, a new rebirth and excitement, a new renaissance of loving what they were doing. Because to be on a stage with a brilliant man, a consummate genius, I have to say, like Yo-Yo Ma, is very affirming for a group of local musicians, even though they are professionals. And it says you are worthy. And it was already apparent in that rehearsal, which still had the concert a year away. Well, now it was Monday. And, you know, I left my office, crossed off the last Monday, September 10th on the calendar, and I went home. And next morning, I got up very early because I wanted to just savor every moment of what I knew was going to be an absolutely unbelievable day. I didn't know exactly what was going to happen, but I knew it was going to be amazing. And I was kind of shocked out of my reverie, I guess, by a phone call. And it was a phone call from our principal percussionist, who is a pretty gruff guy, which is totally perfect for a percussionist at all. That's like what goes with their territory. So he said, "Susan." "Yeah, Bob." And he said, "You got the TV on?" I said, "No, I don't have the TV on." He said, "You better turn it on. I gotta go, bye." So I turned on the television and was confronted with this horrifying picture of the plane hitting the first tower. And I happen to be a real news junkie. I mean, I would sit and watch stuff without moving for the whole day. But I couldn't, because I had to laser in on the party I was going to be giving for 1,800 people. That concert was sold out. There wasn't a seat left, and it was going to happen. I figured this was something localized in New York at that moment, and so I finished dressing, got in my car. As I was driving down to the office, it became clear on NPR that the second tower had been hit, and they were shutting down airports. Now, Yo-Yo was to fly in that morning and do the rehearsal in the afternoon, concert that night, go on to Denver the next morning, or actually go back to Denver that night. And that's the way it is with these major artists. So, of course, I thought, well, he's not here. He's not going to be here. And you have to start thinking up, plan B. And meanwhile, listening between the lines as I could to what was actually the tragedy that was unfolding. I got to my office. The first phone call I made was to the Brown Palace Hotel in Denver, because I knew that was where he was supposed to be staying. And to my utter amazement, I was connected with his room, and he answered the phone. I couldn't believe it. From the other end of the line came the most solid, peaceful, compassionate voice I think I can imagine, totally unlike mine. And he just exuded calmness. And he said, yes, I was able to hop on a private plane from my gig last night. The guy was going to Denver, so instead of taking the plane this morning, I came in last night. And in Yiddish, there's the word b'shert, and I think in that, it was just meant to be. And so he was there, and I said, well, as soon as I know what's happening, I will let you know. Thank you. And he said, I am at your disposal. I will do anything you want. You just have to ask. And I said I would get back to him. You know, this told you what a heart this man had. He was just, when he played, his music came from the deepest part of his soul. It wasn't a technical thing. It was a love and a passionate thing. And that came through in everything he did. The first thing I had to find out was if Pikes Peak Center was even going to be open. Because as you know, we don't own Pikes Peak Center, it's owned by the county, and they were closing buildings because nobody knew the extent of the terror and the extent of the attacks. And so I finally found out an hour later that indeed the center would remain open, which was great. And so I called Yo-Yo and I said, Larry Smith, and he knew Larry, and I are driving up to Denver to pick you up, because he had no way to get down here. And we did, and I found myself in the lobby of the Brown Palace, and it was chaos in that lobby. And people were crying, and some were screaming, and some were in a catatonic state, and televisions were blaring, and I called his room, and all of a sudden the elevator doors opened, and it was just like the Red Sea, you know. And there he stood, and he had his arms open as wide as possible, and strapped to his back was his $4 million Stradivarius cello in a royal blue fiberglass case, and he bounded out of the elevator, and he threw his arms around me like I was his mother. I'm telling you, at that moment, I didn't have the bandwidth to deal with that. It was so, you know, cognitive dissonance or harmonic convergence, I don't know what you want to call it, but I kept thinking, it's just me, standing here, and here's the greatest, one of the greatest musicians in the world, embracing me and hugging me. It just was, it was amazing. Anyway, we got back in the car, and almost immediately, the first discussion we had was, could we have the concert? Because it was a big decision. I mean, was it an affront to people? Would it be seen as an affront? Was it going to be disrespectful? It was something that we really had to think about, because nothing like this, as you all know, had ever happened before. And so the response, you didn't know how to respond. Well, we three talked about it for a while, and we decided we could reprogram the whole concert to make it appropriately somber and sensitive and acknowledging and reverential and respectful. And so Larry and Yo-Yo reprogrammed the whole concert as we drove back down, and every time they came up with a new word, I would call our music librarian and say, go and find, you know, Bach's there on the G string, or go and find the Barber Adagio. And he would go get it, he'd have to get it all marked for the musicians and get it on their stands for the rehearsal that afternoon. And we went to the hall, we had our rehearsal. Yo-Yo went to his dressing room to rest, and I went home to change my clothes. And as I was driving back to the center, I thought, you know, what if nobody comes? You know, that certainly was a possibility, and I had to accept that. I just didn't know. We had been on the, you know, we called all the media, and people had been calling the office all day long, and my staff had been telling people the concert was going to happen, but still, that didn't mean they were going to come. And so I didn't know. I got to the hall, I went in the back door as I always do, and I listened in at the lobby doors. The audience hadn't come in yet. And I heard noise in the lobby, so I thought, well, at least somebody's out there. And I had a little talk with Larry and Yo-Yo, and Then the audience was let in, and they all took their seats, and I peeked through the curtains, and every seat was taken. I couldn't believe it. I absolutely couldn't believe it. But it certainly said to me, we need to be together. We need to be with others. And the musicians began to take their seats, and as the last few musicians were kind of straggling in, Yo-Yo, I was standing backstage next to Yo-Yo, and he leaned over to me, and he said, "May I ask you a favor?" "May I?" And I said, "Of course." And he said, "Would you mind putting a chair at the back of the cello section for me? At a time like this, I would like to be with my fellow musicians for the whole evening." And with a huge lump in my throat, I put the chair in the back of the cello section. Now, most of the musicians were already on stage, so they didn't notice. They had their backs to this, and the audience didn't really notice because it was so far in the back. And Yo-Yo slipped in and took his seat. Later, his stand partner would say, "Wish I'd practiced a little more." But he did take his seat at the back of the orchestra. And I want you to know that this amazing human being played every note of that concert. I had tears streaming down my face, and I know I was not the only one. And it spoke so much of the ability of art and music as a universal language, as a tool for bringing people together, even in the most difficult of times, and for the ability of music to be that salve that can begin to heal such a gaping wound as we all felt. And Yo-Yo Ma knew what it took for an orchestra like ours to bring him here. He knew the effort, he knew the sacrifice, and he had it in his heart and in his soul to make sure we saw that he knew that. And so as one, we grieved, we unified, and we played. And it was magnificent. Thank you.